Thanks for joining us for our next episode of Cardiac Café. I'm Laura DeLise, Executive Director of For Hearts Worldwide. And today we'll be talking about heart healthy eating with a device or without a device. Heart health is important for everyone. And so the topics we'll be covering today are lifestyle topics that are good for everyone to know and to put into practice. Today we'll be joined by our good friend, Chris Zawiza. He is a registered dietitian and nutritionist, a certified diabetes educator, retired, but still very close to the industry, lots of knowledge and experience, and he'll be walking us through this topic of eating for your heart health. Today's agenda is lifestyle versus genetics, key findings on research to help us know what we're supposed to be doing when lifestyle rules, gene expression, and reversing that gene expression. We've been hearing a lot about that in the news recently. This is a really important one, diet versus dieting, very key differences in those words. And Chris is going to walk us through all of this and help us understand what it really means to be heart healthy, eat heart healthy, and protect our cardiovascular system. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris and let him introduce himself a little bit, and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you. I was looking, Cardiac Cafe almost seems like we could rebrand as a restaurant.
In Las Vegas, there was that heart attack cafe or something like
That
that.
just closed. Did you see that? Yeah, they COVID shut it down. Yeah.
That was pretty scary.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of what we'll be learning today.
I believe that was the same restaurant that also had a freight scale in the front of the restaurant that people could, yeah.
Scary.
It's Vegas.
Let's talk about the opposite of that and how to be
Yes.
healthy.
Yeah, you wanted me to talk about something other than excesses in Las Vegas, definitely. When you approached me with this, you mentioned that there was some question as to whether or not there were any significant dietary differences between patients that had a pacemaker, patients that were not pacer implanted. And then we wanted to really touch base on the importance of what is in our control. Many times when we talk about chronic disease, and we hear a lot in the news, obviously, about almost daily, there's a subject that they're discussing. Sometimes it almost seems like if every member of our family had something, we're inevitably going to get it too. And this hits very close to home. The male side of my family doesn't live very far past their 70s. My father, his brothers, my mother's side of the family, her brother, etc. Males in our family get the short end of the stick. The women carry on for many, many, many years. And this is something that's pressing upon me. My father had 2 strokes prior to the big one. And my father was a physician. He was a dermatologist, and he was extraordinarily non-adherent to his medication regimen. He did not like taking his blood pressure medications for many reasons. And even so, the amount of knowledge that we have about a subject does not carry directly over into behavioral changes because of that knowledge. And I think that's a very important point. We could flood you with information. You were mentioning your mother receiving journal articles.
Mhm.
And it's wonderful. I mean, it's great to stay up on the latest research and what's happening from a community side of things, or a health provider community side of things. But the more knowledge that we have on a subject is not a guarantee that our behavior is going to reflect such knowledge. And I felt it always really important to touch base on that whenever I was working with anyone. Information can be overwhelming. Information can wind up to be contradictory or seemingly contradictory. And that's sort of the nature of science. It is revised continuously, not necessarily in a contradictory way, but as more and more information becomes available, the message changes to some degree. But when we really get down to what constitutes a healthy lifestyle or positive impacts that we can make voluntarily upon our long-term health, it really seems to be environment much more so than genetics that determines this. Now, there are specific genetically connected diseases. We'll say certain forms of breast cancer, for example, and so forth. That's not what we're talking about. More conditions that are directly impacted by our lifestyle, our eating behavior, exercise habits, whether or not we're moving or not moving, sedentary lifestyles, and so forth. Seems to be that 80 to 90% of total chronic disease occurrences pretty much due to lifestyle and the environment that we live in. An environment can be...
Sorry to interrupt, but when you say chronic disease, just to make sure everybody knows, like, what are the examples that you would call those?
The primary ones that we're going to see patients, we're going to be treating patients for, and they're all very much connected to one another, but we would say heart disease, specifically diseases that circulatory diseases. diabetes, also being affected by the circulatory. We're
Mhm.
talking about high blood pressure as well too. So those three things, they're and connected to those intimately is body weight. So if we're talking about overweight, high blood pressure, diabetes, and heart disease, that would pretty much constitute 100% of the cases that we saw in clinic, at least
Mhm.
specifically in a cardiology clinic. Now, obviously, when you're in a different setting like a general practice or so forth, you're going to get respiratory allergies, things
Mhm.
like that, asthma as well too. But I think the primary categories right there: heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but where I know you from is from the cardiovascular clinic that you last worked in, and your position there was just that, counseling patients on how to trick their genetics, if you will, or how to, I think you'll talk about it a little bit more, but how to take that those chronic diseases and bring them under control.
Risk factors, yeah, exact management of risk factors. Again, I emphasize the fact that just because there is a family history, it could be high blood pressure. Everybody in my family my mother was on 3 blood pressure medications prior to my father passing away. 6 months after he passed, she didn't need blood pressure medication anymore. And our family physician, who was a personal friend of the family for many years, and was also my doctor, basically said, "Yeah, it looks like your dad was the cause for your mother's high blood pressures." So again, too, in a comical way, it's sort of emphasizing the importance of maintaining a peaceful environment. So it doesn't just have to do with the part of the world you live in or the neighborhood you live in or whatever. It could actually be what's occurring under your own roof.
Well, I think that's an important thing. One of the last episodes we did was about stress and anxiety and how that plays into your health, and specifically cardiovascular health. We had a pacemaker patient on who talked about the stress and anxiety that she lived with. In her case, it was about her pacemaker because there was a lot of contributing factors, but how to manage that and how important for many different reasons it is to manage stress and anxiety. And I think that's just another real life example of the importance of that. Yeah.
And I say this all very tongue in cheek. Obviously, I'm sure Dr. Holt's chart notes are going to indicate otherwise. But when we're just talking as friends, he was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, your dad probably caused her."
Yeah. Relationships are stressful.
It can be. They
Yeah.
certainly can be.
Yeah. Okay. So modifying behaviors, your environment playing a huge role in the expression of chronic disease and issues and factors that all works together and being heart healthy.
Yeah, I think everybody's got the message about tobacco use and smoking, obviously a modifiable behavior there. But again, I always like to use the term eating habits. What are our eating habits? Rather than throwing out other terms and so forth. Yeah, that's modifiable.
Hmm.
A lot of people think it's not, but ultimately it is somewhat modifiable. Physical
Absolutely.
activity is modifiable unless there are limitations. But I see people in the gym all the time who are using the pool. And
Mhm.
the main reason why they're using the pool is because they've got degenerative joint disease and they can't get comfortable in any other form of cardio exercise. So they swim,
It's one of the best ones you can do.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody that's swam laps knows it. If you look at the numbers, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. 90% of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, 70% stroke. The number one cause of stroke is uncontrolled high blood pressure. And I just gave you a classic example of how that affected my family. Well, in my dad's case, he didn't like taking his medicine. And it remains, I guess there's an open-ended question as to how much it impacted my mother's health as far as that's concerned. But her blood pressure was perfectly normal. Even 10 years later, her blood pressure was still normal. So again, if you look at the statistics on this, type 2 diabetes, we've heard the message. It's gotten out for many, many, many years that control your body weight helps control your blood sugar numbers. And people that have lived it are believers. I was stopped at a 7-Eleven getting gas in my neighborhood, and a woman taps me on the shoulder, and I knew I recognized her, but I didn't know where I recognized her from. And she said, "Do you remember me?" And I'm like, put me on the spot. And she goes, "No, my husband and I came to one of your classes at MacDill Air Force Base, and this is 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now." And she said, "I just want to let you know that what we picked up from that diabetes class," and it wasn't just me giving the class, it was a group of providers, it was a team. So we had physical therapists came in to talk about exercise. We had an internal medicine doc come in about the medical management of these conditions. Even a pharmacist would come in and speak about the pharmaceutical interventions and so forth. So it was really interesting because we had a sampling from many other providers coming in. And Tanya, she said, basically in a nutshell, she said, "No, we just want to thank you because it kept my husband off medication for 20 years."
Mhm. Right.
And I was not certainly expecting that conversation getting coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
But it just really we're in an occupation where sometimes we scratch our heads thinking, God, I wonder if the patient's really taking away anything valuable that they could adapt into their own lifestyle. And
Well, one of the things I remember in having previous conversations with you is how you really focus on, I'm going to call them baby steps, but they're not really baby steps. It's like picking one thing and focusing on that. And it's usually a very simple adaptation. It's usually a very simple modification. But those simple things add up. And I think maybe that particular example you just gave of the woman stopping you is putting those little tidbits, like she said, that she picked up from that class into practice, and how those very small modifications actually have great impact. And I think sometimes for the general public or people in general, they think it has to be overwhelming. They think it has to be huge sweeps of changes when it can be a very small, specific thing that's modified initially to make impact.
even if they were sampling one bullet point from each provider over a period of 2 days, they would have gotten a wealth of information. It was a very unique situation at the time. And again, those are some of the things that you just come back and I didn't know how to react at first. And then after I got in my car, I was just like, wow, did that just really happen? So even things that we were doing many, many years in the past can find their way into, yeah, I had a great day that day when she mentioned that.
Yeah, you feel like you've accomplished something, right? Or made an
Agreed.
impact, I should say. Helps.
Agreed. Well, and you don't get long-term feedback like that many times. If you're just doing a class, you may see those patients individually, or you may never see them again. They may have only come to that class because it was convenient for them, but all of their other healthcare is taken care of outside of the Air Force Base in that situation. They were retired military. So it was very rewarding, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Even and emphasis again, even those with high familial risk for certain cardiovascular disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, body weight. Again, you're not locked in to inevitability of contracting these things. And that's the nature of the slide presentation, is that a lot of these things, not only are they somewhat reversible, but they may never occur to begin with if we can get them, if we can start early enough. Surprisingly, at this point, 73 medical universities in the United States have signed on to providing 40 hours of high level nutrition education for medical students. Now, this was something that when I was in college, we would fantasize about this. I was in an environment in your father's clinic where all of the providers had a fairly high level of understanding the impact of diet and nutrition on cardiovascular disease. So it was a very rare company to be put in that situation and to have a specialist come in and assist them because of just the time constraints. So having all this wonderful education as a physician, 40 hours of high level nutrition education, I would say that they're still confined by a 20-minute encounter in the exam room. So what that's going to do for people in my industry, hopefully, is increase awareness from the provider side of things that referrals can be made, because ultimately primary care is in charge of all of the referrals that are made to specialists. So hopefully this is sort of just the very beginning of the transition over to preventative care rather than treating it after it's already happened or after it's very complicated.
Mhm.
I think we're seeing more and more of that. That's a great, and this is all voluntary. Universities are not being put under any financial pressure or any legislative pressure to do this. This was something they all got together and agreed upon that it would be a great idea for future doctors. And I read somewhere that this right now affects over 30,000 students in this country.
Okay.
Now, who's been teaching them? Probably registered dietitians at some stage of the game. So I think it's a win-win for everybody. It gives the dietitians definite recognition, but at the same token, I think the communication between providers is going to be elevated to a much higher degree.
Yeah, I remember I've read a lot as well about how current medical students don't have that training, and it's kind of up to them to seek it out themselves, or to maybe sometimes it's like a small elective, or maybe sometimes they get a little
Yeah.
extra seminar on it or something like that. But to your point of diet nutrition, it's more than just the food we eat. It's taking care of your body. And one of the things, like, I'm just looking at the presentation, you say whole food diet, but really it's looking at your body as a whole entity and not parceling it out like you're just looking at the heart or you're just looking at the lungs or but we have to remember all of those things work together, and that diet, nutrition, and health and exercise affects all of that as a whole being. And that's really what we're talking about, is like protecting yourself as a whole being.
Do you know, anything that can also increase communication across disciplines in medicine is always a good thing. This is something, I guess the term colleagues always gets thrown out when we hear that. But yeah, getting more physicians to communicate about nutrition is a good thing, as long as it's accurate information. And healthcare providers are people too. We're as susceptible to all these messages, and we fall into being human. We are subjected to the same types of things that our patients are encountering. It affects us too. I see this as a very positive step, and a more formalizing that, yeah, nutrition does have an impact in the medical management of patients for the primary chronic conditions that are affecting the majority of Americans and worldwide as well too.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, I think the nutrition is the basis of, we talked earlier about the difference between, and it's here on this slide, like what is your diet versus dieting, which some
This is a
people
long
think are.
definition. Yeah, and I thought this is my definition, and I don't believe that you can have a practical, a productive discussion about eating unless we examine everything that can affect someone's habits. They talk about diet being cultural, it could be religious, it could encompass so many different aspects of life. But what we're really focusing on is fundamentally what forms the dominant part of your food intake. If we look, these are patterns of consumption, food selection. It could be what is convenient on the drive from home to work in the morning. Diets are driven by a mix of biological, psychological, social, and environmental factors. Anybody with lactose intolerance knows something about biological food decision making. People with a peanut allergy know very quickly which foods that they need are little red flag foods. And they become very upset if something wasn't disclosed on a menu, or if something, and we see a lot more transparency on food labeling now. I see all the time, if it's a bagged or a boxed, this product has possibly come in contact with peanuts.
Hmm.
I remember one patient, Laura, many years ago, was telling me something about they opened up a bottle of wine and she got an allergic reaction because the cork was made, I think it was like a soy based cork or
Oh,
something.
wow.
It was something so completely ridiculous at first glance. And I was like, well, they need to start disclosing that they're using soy in the manufacture of the wine stopper.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
to your point, that's a very legitimate concern for somebody who has a biological issue reaction that they have to pay attention to.
it's real for them, and it's
Yeah.
affecting them every day. Psychological. I love this one. This was always my favorite one for whatever reason, but tell me that your mood doesn't possibly impact your food decision making.
Every day.
Yeah. I mean, if you're having a real bad day and you feel like the whole world is coming down on you, you can't race to get right back home and open up a can of water packed tuna, right?
That's the
Maybe
first
there's
thing I
someone
go for.
maybe there's someone out there that craves sardines when they're in a bad mood, but it's probably something else. Is it fair to say that?
Yeah. Well, let me
Social.
follow that up by saying, what is your take on, let's say mine is, and I know, I mean, this is true. Mine is cookie dough. That is when I am stressed, I want cookie dough. And that is, and I think we probably had this discussion before, but it makes me feel better. It de-stresses me and it calms me down. I think it's rooted in my childhood somewhere, but to that point, we can't be perfect 100% of the time. We are humans. So how does that factor into like this diet versus dieting approach to eating?
Perfect eating, I've noticed that they call it orthorexia, by the way. There's an actual term for this condition that afflicts some people where they're trying to eat perfect all the time. And I've met quite a few dietitians over the years that have been affected by orthorexia. They're trying to out healthy each other. And usually it is a meal prep, like in like a Tupperware container or something. And each little Tupperware container has a division for her starch and her protein-based food, et cetera, and or his rather. Not, I'm not just going to pick on female dietitians. There are male dietitians as well. But yeah, I've witnessed this. I've witnessed this at in a lunchroom where everything is meticulously sorted out and taken out. And I'm like, well, I'm wondering, does she do that when she's alone? I don't know. But certainly our mood and our psychological status has a huge impact on our, at least when we talk about things like cravings or something like that, or
Right.
we have foods that comfort us in times of stress. I think it's fair enough to say that.
Okay. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
a dietitian, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, like, every now and then, that's okay, as long as it's not your daily intake.
And it goes right back to the top. Let's look at the totality of everything that you're eating, everything that, yes, I have those foods too. Big reveal here. Yes.
What? Chris
It's,
eats ice cream?
oh my gosh. Chris eats pizza. Exactly. But I think what maybe separates, there's a lot of baggage from our college experience, our education, our professional experience. There's a lot of baggage that stays up there. So in my brain, it's like, well, I know I love pizza, and if I intend to have it, if I'm eating it by myself, is it a better idea to get a small or a large?
There you go.
Because regardless of the size, I have figured out I'm still going to eat the whole thing. So then it becomes you're sort of learning about what your habits actually are, and perhaps maybe how to circumvent some of those things that may be causing you to visit a cardiologist 4 times a year as opposed to 2 times a year. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Perhaps maybe some of those decisions are affecting whether or not your medication continues to get adjusted upward and upward and upward. Or perhaps maybe take you off one medication that you don't need anymore. And that's a big break because everybody's got their co-payments, and there's a lot of impact that can be had just from making gradual changes. Small, seemingly insignificant things can accumulate over time. And before you know it, you're doing 20 things differently than you did a year before. And it doesn't really feel that much work.
What would be the top? I mean, if you had to pick top 3 or 5 modifications that you've seen in your practice that had great impact, that are kind of putting you on the spot, that are
Yeah.
typically a little bit, I'm going to say easier, are not, they're not like huge changes, but they're things that seem to be accepted a little bit easier. What would those be?
From my experience personally, I like to begin with what you're drinking when you're thirsty.
Okay.
I think it's a great place to start.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that complicated. There are habits involved that obviously we can address those things, but I'll give you a perfect example. There was a woman in our clinic, came in significantly overweight, but she also depended on the county for her housing. And one of the homes that she was living in was immediately behind a convenience store. And really, even before she recognized what was happening, she would, her exercise involved leaving her house, walking to the convenience store, filling up with a fountain drink, and then walking back to the house, and then repeating that a couple of times a day. And I said, well, how do you feel about maybe trying to drink something else? And she said, what do you mean, like water? And I said, would you drink water? She's like, yeah. And specifically, she named a brand that she really is fond of. And I was like, can you do that? Like starting today until the next time I see you? And she did. She agreed to do it. And she came back and she was pleasantly surprised that her weight was down. And Laura, after a year and a half, now I didn't see her, it could be quarterly, maybe every couple of months
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. The woman was down 55 pounds in a year and a
Wow.
half.
Mm.
And the other thing that I found really, uh, and this was unexpected, but I just saw her whole attitude change. Her facial expressions indicated she was in a better mood most of the time. Hairstyle was a little bit different. And then to top it all off, towards the last time that I saw her, she was going to get a new set of teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing about biology, I think the teeth are very useful for eating. And I don't think a lot of dietitians really emphasize that if a patient has got poor dentition, that might be affecting their food decision making, because they're going to switch to softer foods that require less chewing. So
Mm-hmm.
again, you got to look at the whole picture here.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was a success story that she really didn't think she did anything.
Right.
Like it took her a little while to really connect the dots between, wow, I was drinking this much soda. Now I'm drinking this much. I still have soda, but the way she used to do it. Then
Right.
the water went from here up to here, and her weight went straight down.
Right.
And if you factor this out mathematically on paper, considering how many calories she was taking in from the soda, it actually worked on paper. It was what the numbers told us on paper were very reflective of what we were actually seeing on the scale. So I would love to know that she is still continuing and doing well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So water obviously is very important for a lot of different reasons for your health. What's another like easy modification that you would suggest?
I talk about this a lot. If you are consuming dairy products and in your household, full fat dairy takes front stage, might they be willing to compromise somewhere, perhaps maybe reduced fat, maybe going from a whole milk down to a 2% milk? Is that something that they can live with? Most people will agree that that's something they can live with. And that's why I would never suggest somebody who's drinking 3.5% milk, red cap milk.
Hmm.
I'm not going to tell them to go to skim milk overnight because they're not going to do it. It's a waste of both of our time. But there are compromises, certainly. You take even 1 cup of whole milk at 150 calories, drop it down to 2%, and you save 30 calories. It's something like that. It doesn't look like that's a lot on paper, but do that for 300 days and see what happens. You
Well,
know,
I think the point is well taken that it can be very simple things. And I think also the second point that you just mentioned is don't go from one extreme to the other. Work your way through that.
transition. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
give yourself that grace of that transition. If you know that there's something that you can improve upon, allow yourself to go through that transition for a lot of different reasons that you mentioned, like biologically, socially, psychologically, and making that adjustment. You know that it doesn't have to be all or nothing; it could be a process.
That's that's the point. That's
Yeah.
exactly the point. And the accumulation of very small changes can make a huge impact. It really can. And it doesn't have to be. If you look at what I've written down for dieting, using the term dieting, what I hear when someone tells me they're dieting, it's something that is intentional. They've done it. It's made them perhaps maybe take a look at what they were doing, and they're following instructions from either whatever source, whatever diet is in vogue.
Hmm.
And when you've been in the industry as long as I have, it has gone.
You've seen them all.
Yeah, you wind up someone is telling you that they've reinvented something, but if you look, it's 50 years old at this point. It usually implies short-term or temporary changes, and I kind of like you're on a diet or you're off a diet, and
Right.
it's very intentional. Whereas when I think most people would, when they hear that word, I think that's what most people would associate it with, rather than the point that I was driving with diet. I tend to associate more with eating habits
Hmm.
and day-to-day eating habits and approaching it from that standpoint with respect to all these other little factors. Certainly got to the point where I was asking people about how their teeth feel.
Yeah.
No,
Interesting. Interesting to note that for sure. Okay. What's next?
this is addressing at least the point that some of your patients expressed concern that there could be different dietary recommendations for patients that have a pacemaker implant or a non-paced patient. And I just want to assure everybody that clinically there's no differences in nutritional recommendations. It's pretty solid across the board. There is an emphasis on lowering your overall saturated fat intake. That is not a new message. That is something that's been around for a very long time.
Mhm.
We know a lot more about saturated fats than we had even when I was in college. So we know that they're not all created equally. I intend to address some of those issues in some of the other slides. You're going to hear me talk about dietary fiber, big time, and why we constantly are bombarded with this message: fruits and vegetables, and so forth. But what we're really getting at is these anti-inflammatory phytonutrients that come from these types of foods just do not exist in other types of foods. You don't hear any revolutionary anti-cancer compound discovered in cheese, but yet you turn on the news and there's something yet found in blueberries that promotes a positive reaction in the human body. I think that's what I'm trying to get at here. I think from a fruits and vegetables standpoint, they do contribute significant amounts of fiber, but as well they contribute these anti-inflammatory compounds. And anybody that was ever through your father's clinic was hearing about inflammation. guaranteed.
Yes, including me. All right. Well, then let's get into like some of those nitty gritties.
What are the top three things that we see in clinic? Well, we see cardiovascular disease, diabetes, overweight or obesity, and high blood pressure. All of these things can be improved upon, sometimes dramatically so, with beginning with as little as a 10% reduction in your body weight. And I think it's really important. I always liked using percentages because you're always going to encounter patients that weigh different amounts.
Hmm.
If someone is 300 pounds at 5'5", telling them, well, you're 170 pounds, I think the message, but if you tell them 10%, well, what's 10%? Oh, it's 30 pounds. I can do that. Yeah, but can you keep it off? Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure okay, well, let's focus on that.
Start there.
So
Hmm.
if you use percentages, works for someone who's 250 pounds, works for someone who's 200 pounds. Again, this is a very important number. We've got a lot of data to support these things. Reduction in hemoglobin A1C, which is long-term blood sugar control, has an impact on blood pressure, and also reduction in LDL cholesterol as well as triglycerides. The key takeaway here, though, is I'm really going to hammer home the idea that everybody should actively practice trying to get more fiber into their diet. There is no greater reward to the body than to increase your fiber intake. As little as a 10-gram increase has a 10% reduction in overall death from any cause
Wow.
unrelated to accidental accidents and
Hmm.
injury and so forth. No other dietary modification can touch what fiber can contribute to the human body.
Wow. What are the best fiber? What do we need to add into our diet?
Well, one of the things
Our eating habits.
one of the things that I've gotten into lately, and if you look at this 30 grams a day fiber, please go gradually. If you're unaccustomed to having a therapeutic amount of fiber in your body, you do not want to go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. You will get all of the lovely side effects associated by increasing dietary fiber. I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm not a gastroenterologist, but do them.
Noted.
Yeah, imagine that in your head if you would. I think it's it's interesting, and I think the industry has responded to this message in offering products that what I consider just fortified foods. So if I'm a big fan of, let's just say, Taco Tuesday, I generally could encourage people to get into the idea of soft tacos versus crunchy tacos.
Okay.
What's the difference? Well, one of them's deep fried and the other one is not. You take that idea, if they like yeah, I like soft tacos. Well, great. Would you be willing to try this brand? And I'm going to direct them. There's at least 3 different brands of tortilla wrap. I'm not even kidding, Laura. You can literally get 29 grams of fiber in one tortilla, and it's around
I've seen
150.
them. I've
Yeah.
purchased them.
And I also want to emphasize I am not endorsed by any food manufacturer. I have no financial conflict of interest in any of this. So hearing it from you that you've seen them, you've bought them,
Yep.
what do you think?
They're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love soft tacos better than hard tacos.
So they're in my house. So if you're telling me as a consumer that I can get my daily fiber intake requirement from one tortilla, it's definitely something that I'm interested in hearing about. I would also say that I always liked using the term grown-up cereals. Yeah, there's a lot of options in the cereal department. We talked about, unless you have a problem with dairy products, you're probably going to be pouring milk on it, cow's milk on it. And that's changing from whole to 2 to 1, whatever is treated the same way. Go gradually. Taste buds have a way of changing over time, but taste buds also have, let's put it this way, if it's subtle changes, they might not even be recognized by your taste buds. So if I was to make a mixed casserole dish and substituted full fat sour cream for reduced fat sour cream, and if it wasn't the primary ingredient in the dish, there's a good chance no one's going to notice. Yeah, if it's like a mixed dish where it's maybe a small part of a mixed dish, there's a good chance you could substitute it. Classic example would be if you're making salad dressing and it calls for either mayonnaise or it could be sour cream or something like that. I can't tell you how many people have learned that they can substitute part of it, perhaps not all of it, but part of it for Greek yogurt without very much of a sacrifice in taste or texture or anything like that. I'm a big advocate of, again, fortified foods that perhaps maybe have something extra added to it. A lot of those same high fiber tortillas are also using flaxseed, which is a plant-based source of omega-3 fatty acids. And again, we know that those are heart healthy. So I look for the little victories wherever possible with some of these products. Some of them I've adopted and they become regular parts of my grocery shopping habits.
If I were to just pick one whole natural food for fiber, what would be the best pick outside of a packaged product?
Beans,
Beans. Okay.
beans, legumes,
All
legumes.
right.
I was just on a phone call with one of my dear friends and his wife was having some problems. And he was like, well, should I get fill in the blank, whatever fiber supplement is on the market? And I was like saying, well, what are some other things you could do? Well, how could she increase her fiber intake? So we went over a couple of ways. And I was like, I know his wife. His wife loves eating salads. She usually does like a high protein salad, maybe some chicken breast or something of that, salmon or something. And I was like saying, does she like chickpeas? Yeah, she loves chickpeas. Throw some chickpeas in there. Boom. Because you're not really getting a lot of fiber in lettuce. It's minimal. It might go up a little bit if you switch to something like cabbage, for instance. But again, you got to appreciate the fact that that's an acquired taste. That's not something that everybody is going to be willing to try. I think the flexibility of legumes, soups, they can be used served as appetizers, like if it's hummus,
hmm
you know.
I've actually made cookie dough from chickpeas.
I've seen brownie recipes that have
Yeah,
black
it's
beans.
really good. I'm being healthy and I'm satisfying my craving.
And if the taste is something that is agreeable to you,
Yeah.
you might do it again.
Yeah.
There's another caveat there. If it's not too much labor involved, I would say
Correct.
it's
But to your point of just throwing some chickpeas or throwing some black beans or throwing some into a salad, it's as simple as opening a can and throwing them in there and you're adding that much more value to the
that's a
meal
good way
you
to
would
look
have.
at it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you might get some pushback from people, oh, well, canned beans have so much salt in them. Well, yeah, I've certainly seen unsalted or low
Yeah.
sodium versions of those things.
Yep.
And again,
Exactly.
it goes right back into how much labor do we want to put into it? Beans are cheap. You can buy pounds of them for just a couple of dollars. And if you cook up a huge batch, they keep well.
hmm
Certainly, you're in complete control over the ingredients that go into the water when you're cooking them yourself versus canned products. So, I mean, that's another consideration. There is a little bit more effort involved in cooking them, but I've seen people use slow cookers. I've seen people use the Instapot to cook them quickly under pressure. But
True.
putting me on the spot like that, I would have to say beans and legumes are probably the simplest.
Perfect. Okay. So this is back to the sodium. Okay,
Oh boy.
I'll switch from canned chickpeas to I can soak some chickpeas and cook them.
And again, too, I mean, there are other methods too. I mean, there are quick
Yeah.
cook ways that we could do it under pressure. If you've got a
Yeah.
pressure cooker, like an Instant Pot, there are workarounds to those things
Mhm.
that perhaps might save some time. Sodium. I think the overall recommendation has been 2,300 milligrams for many, 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 many years. You may see some physicians still do like 2 grams sodium diet, like if they're writing their recommendations or if I get a referral in from an outside physician and say 2G sodium diet, that's where they're getting a lot of this from. I think the number one things that we have to be aware of, this makes so much common sense as long as we're using it actively. If it tastes salty, there's a lot of sodium in it. Okay. And we can appreciate the fact that taste buds are different. You've probably been over someplace where perhaps maybe something that was cooked was overly salty to your taste buds, but the person sitting right next to you doesn't say anything about it. So we're all a little bit different in our sensitivity to sodium. It shouldn't be surprising that people that eat a lot of salty foods have a very high capacity for what they consider to taste salty versus
Right.
someone who never used it, a couple of grains on there, and they may tell you, oh, it's too salty. So it does come with practice. Taste buds can be reprogrammed. It's something to be very mindful of. But what I can assure you is just because soda has SOD in the word, there is not a lot of sodium in soda. I've been asked that question many times. I understand where the confusion might occur. And my reaction to that is, when was the last time you tasted a salty Sprite?
Yeah.
It
That
tastes
that
sweet.
that kind of brings up a question in my head. What there's a huge fad right now of electrolytes, specifically electrolytes that are just basically salt drinks. Where do you stand on those out of curiosity more than anything else? But
Boy, Gatorade kind of started this about 50 years ago, didn't
yeah.
they? And then Pedialyte kind of steps in, which is like baby Gatorade,
Yeah.
basically.
I mean, I see if you're dehydrated and sick and you have like I can see that there's a need for it. But I feel like it's becoming like the marketing that I see is like everybody needs to drink electrolytes every day. And I know they're all made differently and they all have different amounts of different combinations of things. But is that, I guess my basic question is when you're looking at these sodium recommendations and that number,
It's tough, isn't it?
yeah, especially if you're one of those who is drinking electrolytes every day.
It adds up.
Yeah,
Certainly by and large, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's marketing. And I'm really, I guess, jaded at this point because I've been bombarded with so much marketing, especially in my profession. We can make something sound really important due to advertising,
of
due to
course.
marketing.
Hmm.
And if we understand that at the end of the day, all of this is possible with profit margins, and how much are they earning on an electrolyte drink? Is
A
it
lot,
really
I'm
any?
sure.
I'm sure. How much different are those things than what is currently available on the market that are much less expensive and so forth?
Well, that was gonna be my next question
Yeah.
is, like, I mean, I know my sisters grew up playing soccer, and they always gave them orange slices to help with the dehydration and the heat and that kind of thing. If you're feeling like you need a little extra boost or something, what would be a good substitute? Like, are there other
Well,
whole food options that don't cost and then also maybe don't kind of push you over those suggested limits?
recognizing it for what it's worth, it is marketing. I think that's the
Mhm.
first step in the right direction. Again, they are trying to pitch a product and sell a product. Ask yourself the question, does Snickers really satisfy? Yeah. Yeah. Is BMW really the ultimate driving machine? Again, too, these are slogans that are used, they're very common. And don't think for a second that the food industry hasn't taken advantage over all that for many, many, many years. They are an industry, they sell product. So to again, we're in a situation where if you are physically active and you are outside, Florida's hot, Florida's humid. We sweat a lot when we're active outdoors. Yeah, you're losing a lot more fluid. I think the most important thing to possibly do is rehydrate. Water does a great job. Water does a great job. When we get claims that, oh, well, our product rehydrates you 30% more effectively than just drinking straight water. Again, too, I think you're dealing with hyperbole to sell a product.
Mhm.
You know, it wasn't just the sugar in the orange slices. It was also the fact that orange slices contain potassium. Orange slices contain vitamins and other vitamins and minerals, which when we get down to it, what are electrolytes? Well, electrolytes are just a fancy term for minerals. Exactly. And they're present in most foods that we eat. So someone is presenting with symptoms of
Right.
electrolyte deficiency, muscle cramping. You have a litany of symptoms that are associated. Most are also associated with dehydration. So getting the
Right.
body rehydrated, again, it's difficult. Salt is ubiquitous. It occurs in just about everything. All you have to do is look on a label of ramen noodles to find out how much salt is in that little packet. The
Mhm.
majority of that exists in the flavoring packet.
Mhm.
There is a little bit in the noodles, not much themselves, but the majority is in the seasoning.
Mhm.
And I get it. Ramen's a very popular food for a lot of my patients. It's inexpensive, it's convenient. So the first thing I say is, okay, well, if the packet of seasoning had 3,000 milligrams of salt in it, can you use half? What do you think about and there's not as much pushback on that rather than a message of like, don't ever eat ramen
You're
again.
right.
Right. Sugar is another very important one. I would say the if you were to Google Amazon on how many books there were on just that topic alone, you're probably going to get like a 9 to 10,000 different. There was sugar busters,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're really focusing on foods with added sugar in them. And again, to inflammation, not aside, a metabolic management of diabetes, perhaps we've got to look at these things in the context of what is affecting us. Certainly, you mentioned orange slices. I don't think anybody in the world would ever remotely indicate that having a post soccer practice meal, a post game meal that included a bag of cuties or something. Again, these are naturally occurring sugars. Nothing was added into it. The bullet point that comes into my head when I think about this is I think of a lot of the drinks from very popular coffee shops.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, take a look at that. Yeah, it wouldn't be a stretch to imagine that you could get about 3 days worth of sugar in a large serving of one
And
of their
3 days worth of caffeine, which is the next
what
one.
what are their signature drinks on the menu?
Yeah.
And caffeine again too. Why does it become a consideration with patients receiving care for their heart? Well, it's a stimulant first of all. So and patients that have pacemakers obviously have heard about rhythm, have heard about arrhythmia. And again, too, if you're continuously intaking something that is supplying stimulants into the body, how much is that going to impact your heart rhythm, your heart rate, etc.? And I get feedback from a lot of patients that are very caffeine sensitive, even very small amounts. They'll get jittery or they'll tell me that they feel amped up on very small amounts. I think exposure over time determines your tolerance to it. Certainly, you and I both have known people that could drink coffee all day long and go right to bed afterwards.
Mhm.
So really it's a personal issue again too. I think it is here to just sort of say, "Hey, don't ignore this, but if you got it under control, you got it under control." And
Mhm.
unless you have absolutely been restricted from any caffeinated products, cup of coffee in the morning is still perfectly acceptable. You got to really watch out for some of those energy drinks. It's not unusual. There's several brands on the market that have 300 milligrams of caffeine per 12-ounce serving. See, but it's all disclosed on the label. So if you just kind of turn the can around and kind of look for it and you're wondering, might this be okay for me? You may
Mhm.
want to switch to one that has less amounts.
You hear some stories too of some of those drinks causing issues for people who drink numerous of them or who are sensitive to the caffeine or maybe have an underlying health issue that, to your point earlier, if you've been told to limit your caffeine for those reasons, you hear some tragic stories. And I'm sure it's not just it doesn't necessarily limit those stories don't limit themselves to the energy drinks. It can happen with any form of the caffeine, but that's just what's it's
Oh,
making
what
the
was it?
news.
I don't want to name names here, but there was at
No,
least
yeah.
one franchised restaurant that we're all familiar with. They were offering, I mean, they really looked innocent. I mean, honestly, it looked like Crystal Light flavored beverages, but when they examined how much, and the caffeine was proportionate to the size of the drink that they were ordering. So
Mhm,
obviously the small had a heck of a lot less than the medium and the large and the extra large and so forth. And people just were claiming to have been unaware that there was that much caffeine in some of those beverages. So I know McDonald's is I mentioned a name, sorry. I know McDonald's has currently got a push for their energy beverages, but they disclose all that information on the label. And if it's ridiculously high, just keep that 400 in mind as kind of like a bookmark.
mhm.
Again, unless you have received orders from a healthcare provider lowering that further due to your medical history, just keep that number in mind. I think it's a good place. It's a good place to start. Think of it like this. If you've got $400 on a gift card, don't spend it all in one place.
There you go. Well, I think a lot of what you're saying is be aware of what you're intaking, right? And understand the macro and micro nutrients and things that are coming into your body, whether it's a whole food versus a product of these things like we're discussing now. And really trying to focus on moderation of these things and how you're personally affected by them and what your personal health status is in regards to those food items as well. Yeah.
Agreed. My best suggestion for alcohol, there's another social factor involved, obviously. It might be helpful to reconsider the size of the glasses that you're using. I did have it was a 5-ounce wine glass on my desk in the office when I was in practice, just to give people a perspective for no other reason. I was not preaching about anything, and certainly what it was designed for was, how does your glass compare with this one? Okay. One glass that you're pouring for yourself may actually be more like two drinks, depending on how many ounces is going in it. So again, too, I think it is if you are, oh, and surprisingly, none of our patients ever drink alcohol. At least that's what they've told me.
Right.
So it was kind of falling on deaf ears, but understanding the fact that you got to look at it from the perspective of alcohol by volume, and the industry is kind of compartmentalized. Beer, 12-ounce serving of beer has about the same amount of alcohol as 1.5 ounces of distilled spirits. I don't know if I need to elaborate on what distilled spirits are, but wine, again, too, you may see 4 ounces, you may see 5 ounces. It depends what source you're looking at. But how many glasses in our house actually hold that amount?
Right.
It's something to consider. At the end of the day, that's a very personal decision. It is worth talking about. If you need help professionally, that's definitely something to discuss with your provider. And there are certainly plenty of resources for that. But I think in the context of just the slide presentation today, men and women, 1 to 2 drinks a day. Yeah, it has calories in it. I would also emphasize that the more that goes into us, that certainly can affect our food decision making. I think the last time that I ever ordered chili cheese fries was at an establishment where there were also several beers involved. So it's the whole sounded like a good idea at the time. I guess you can be mindful. It is something that needs to be addressed if it is a problem. But again, too, I think the most productive way we can look at this is just get a bartender's graduated measuring shot glass. That's a helpful way of doing it.
Yeah.
You may have been pouring yourself doubles
Without knowing.
without even knowing it.
Yeah.
No.
Well, back to
So
moderation and really knowing what your body tolerates, and obviously the advice of your physician when it comes to all of these things, and dietitian.
the healthcare team.
The team. There you go. All right. Let's try to get through some
I'm
of these other
wrapping
ones.
this up. This is not going to be an organic chemistry class, but one of the things that I've seen a lot, advertisements for Wagyu everything, Wagyu hot dogs at a local place in the neighborhood here. And then you get the people that are encouraging this, and then they will always say, well, not all saturated fats are created the same, and that there are saturated fats that contribute to the buildup of plaque in the arteries. There are saturated fats which don't. And rather than getting into a high level discussion, which requires a lot of very lengthy words to identify the actual total number of carbon units on each saturated fat, let's not do that. Let's talk about the fact that not all saturated fats are created equal. Not all saturated fats have the same impact on LDL cholesterol. But what is of very consequence here is inflammation. And saturated fats are very much involved in the production of inflammatory factors in the body. If you have a disproportionate amount of saturated fat intake relative to other healthy fats, we will talk about fish oils. We will talk about these things. Can it increase the likelihood of inflammation, of systemic inflammation? This is what we're talking about, not like a bruise or something where you get a
Mhm.
localized inflammatory reaction. One test that has become very common that I saw a lot on lab reports was C-reactive protein, CRP,
Mhm.
which assesses systemic inflammation throughout the body. Again, too, everybody's paying a lot of money for probiotic supplements these days, and a consistent high saturated fat diet lowers the production of protective IL-22, breaking down the gut barrier and causing chronic inflammation. A lot of that inflammation begins in the gut. It should come to no surprise. Probiotics, these little critters that live by the billions inside of us, love dietary fiber.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It has a very interesting side effect that I'm sure we're all familiar with. Yeah. But that's what's going on there. It's not necessarily you that's producing the gas. It's the probiotic bacteria that are producing the gas. Yeah, it's these little probiotic bacteria that are giving off methane as a result
Mhm.
of the foods that they're eating inside of you. Again, this is something that can be analyzed from a laboratory setting, certainly with the proper testing and so forth. Just keep this in mind, regardless of whether or not it can impact LDL cholesterol, there is still credible evidence that diets higher in saturated fats will increase overall systemic inflammation throughout the body.
And
It's worthwhile.
inflammation from a cardiovascular perspective can lead to what? Just to
Dysfunction
just to
in
be
the
clear.
endothelial dysfunction, to quote your father specifically. So the way that little lining of those blood vessels interacts with its environment.
Okay.
You want good flow, not bad flow.
Right. So it limits the flow is what we're getting at. Yeah. Causes plaque buildup, those kinds of things that you hear about.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
It makes it angrier.
Yeah. We don't want an angry heart. We want an open, soft,
Our blood
loving
vessels need
heart.
to stay nice and calm.
Yeah.
We talked about anxiety earlier. And again, too, I want to just emphasize there are these components within fruits and vegetables that reduce inflammation. It's clearly been demonstrated, but there are many of them. There's a wide variety of families. So, what I would encourage is variety is a great idea because one variety of grapes, for example, may be higher in something than another variety. So, mix it up
Mhm.
if you like it that way. The bottom
Yeah.
line is, I don't care how you do it, increase fruits and vegetables. That's always a good recommendation. Or how you do it, just eat more plants.
Okay. Yeah.
And if people are looking for advice above and beyond that, I was like, do you like soup?
Make a hearty vegetable soup.
You do that in the beginning of the week in a crock pot, put the rest in the refrigerator, dip into that for lunch a couple of times. Again, I think it's a vastly overlooked food that we can introduce a lot of these things, increase our fiber intake as well as increase the amount of antioxidants. And right, it doesn't not necessarily have to be overly salty either when you're in control of it.
Right. Right. And I think just to emphasize again, one of the things you said is we get in the habits, to use your grape example, of buying, let's just say it's a green grape, a green table grape. Switch it up. Get the purple ones, the red grapes. Get something as easy as that can add variety, different antioxidants, different minerals and things like that, just based on something as simple as that. Yeah. To
Agreed.
to add that to your diet. That's a great idea.
Again,
Simple.
it sounds simple. If we can get people to buy into it
Mhm.
and start doing it, keep it
Mhm.
simple.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Again, omega-3 fatty acids, I think the evidence is very clear. It is a good thing to increase our sources of omega-3 fats from things such as salmon. But let's not forget it's not limited to salmon. There are many other species of fish that have it. That just is particularly high in it.
Mhm.
But there's a little bit in tuna. There's a little bit in sardines. So you've got, again, just like your grape analogy, there are a lot of different. If chances are, if people think sardines are too smelly, they might not have the same opinion of another
Yeah,
type of fish. So again, too, it goes right back into the variety.
variety, I like it, yep.
My consultations are limited either to people in the gym now or what I call cash register consultation, where you're checking out and someone behind you says, "Oh boy, you eat healthy," and then that kind of starts up a conversation. So I call them cash register consultations. I had a lot, and I emphasize this, at least half a dozen people asked me questions about the revision to the food guide pyramid that just
Yeah,
occurred with the US Department of Agriculture. And what I have to remind everybody about this is that this is something that there is a mandated, gets updated every 5 years. That's what has been the norm. Okay. Whether or not it's significantly revised every 5 years or just tweaked a little bit, we see the difference. This has been going on since the 1950s. And prior to that, in the 1800s, we had something called the Farmers. I believe it wasn't the Farmers Almanac, but it was published like as a way of helping people manage their budgets while eating healthfully.
yeah,
And it started at a real grassroots level. A lot of news agencies said that they took the pyramid and just turned it completely upside down and so forth. And if you really look at it, I don't get that same message. Yeah, they did put a higher emphasis on protein-based foods with an overemphasis on meat, but they didn't really get into, are all meats created equally? And I think anybody that has eaten steak can agree that there are fattier cuts of meat and less fattier cuts of meat. Find your comfort zone. I think maybe trim off anything in excess. I think the pushback from most patients that I've worked with is, well, I like this because it's higher in fat, and
mhm.
that's where all the flavor is.
I've heard that statement being made.
Sure.
Mhm.
And again, here's what I look at it. Remember what I was telling you about the totality of your food intake over a very long period of time. And I was like, if you're limiting yourself to one category of beef, one category of steak, and it compromises a significant portion of your overall dietary intake. I can't even begin to tell you how many people have come into my clinic and said, you know what I'm going to do, Chris? I'm going to give up birthday cake. And then my next
Once a
question was,
year
well,
slice?
how often are you eating birthday cake? I mean, I understand that large families, there are more members, there are more birthdays in large families. But when you throw something out like that, well, here's what I'm going to do. Well, I'm not encouraging anybody to give up steak, but what I can say is, out of all of the options that are possibly available, how about mixing it up a little bit? Is it reasonable?
Have a leaner cut and
Have a leaner cut and cook it slow so it gets nice and pulled apart. Again, there are a lot of options. Having those options and comparing those to what our habits are involved with, there may be some middle ground there for reconsideration or maybe revisiting of something else. I
Mhm.
agree. Not all substitutions are as acceptable. Let's put it that way. And I think that's where the fine tuning comes into play. Between, again, using the analogy of whole milk and skim milk, there's a lot of in between there. And I
Mhm.
think if we just maybe go gradually and maybe mix it up a little bit, I think a lot of benefit can be had about there. Benefit that is tangible that can be seen on your lab tests
From simple adjustments
over
that
over
are
over
that have
time. Yeah.
over time. Yeah.
Then it doesn't feel like work.
Right. Well, I think that sentence, what you just said, it doesn't feel like work. I think part of people, at least in my experience, people get overwhelmed, right, with what they should be doing or they should be eating or they should be, and that's where that diet versus dieting happens. But I think this whole discussion has been about small adjustments, focusing maybe on a couple of key things like the fiber and the salt and the sugar and the omegas, those focusing on those things, making small adjustments and doing something that is, I don't want to say less painful, like it's easier to tolerate so
How about
that you
more
stick with
acceptable? Is
it.
that is that a better
Yeah.
is that a better way? It's
Yeah.
more it's more
Mhm.
tolerable if you would.
Yeah.
And the other point that I made about there are many fortified foods that can help achieve a lot of these goals. If it's something as you tell me it's something as completely common as a soft tortilla, and I certainly didn't pay you for your
No,
response
you
to say that
didn't.
they were good. Yeah, again, it's like that. There are lots of foods like that. A healthy examination of options in a supermarket when you're shopping is always a good thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
And
and y
and
and you
less added sugars, like looking at
yeah.
the added sugar versus the natural sugars. I've started doing that and really looking at, gosh, you don't really realize, like to your point about salt, I think it's very similar to sugar. You don't realize how much is being put into foods that doesn't naturally occur. And so if you can start limiting that, that makes a huge impact.
Or understand where a healthy cutoff point would be. Whether or not, yeah, I'm not telling everybody to like manage their macronutrients with some phone app. Although many people like doing that, I'm not going to say anything. If you're I notice a lot of CPAs love doing that.
Interesting.
Yeah. I loved having CPAs as patients because they'll tell you, well, how many grams of fiber did you get yesterday? Oh, well,
Yeah.
so it was a lot of fun working with that group, but
Yeah.
not everybody is like that. And if we just use those products that have been afforded to us, we can get them. We don't have to travel very far to get them. They're usually available at your local supermarket. Even better that I've noticed that places like Aldi and Costco have their own versions of the more expensive name brand products. They look exactly the same from the nutrition label standpoint. I think Aldi has their own brand of fruit and nut bar. Yeah, cheaper than the real thing, and they're pretty darn close. It might be worth trying. Again, you don't have to spend a lot of extra money just for these types of healthier products because most of them are available generically. We can get store brands or whatever. And certainly you don't have to travel very far out of your way to get these products. Yeah, most of the supermarkets are carrying these things. It's very common.
My takeaways are really just modifications, small modifications, looking at, I think fiber, I know I have to work on that. So I think that,
We all do.
yeah,
Everybody. Yeah.
yeah, I think these couple different nutrients that you mentioned that can make such a big impact and are easily modified, I think is where we need to start. And really realizing that this conversation might be entitled for cardiovascular health, but it's really for your whole body health and longevity and being able to live your life to the fullest for as long as possible. That's always been my motivation is in my efforts to have a healthier diet. I want to be able to do things when I'm older. I want to be able to enjoy my life. I want to be able to travel. I want to be strong. I want to be all those things. And so working towards those goals and keeping the end goal in mind when you're, looking at these modifications and things that you might be able to do, I think is, finding a motivation, I guess, is a good idea. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and your
Thanks for having me.
expertise. and all of these healthful hints.
I hope that I could be helpful.
Absolutely. We have a lot of information in here. And I think the conversation around the slides was very important to not get stuck on certain points and certain aspects, but really living our life and not getting pulled down into these nitty gritties is important also. And paying attention to our stress levels as well.
And you made some very good points earlier about this all or nothing and it's certainly not about that. It's certainly just what you said. I think, did you use the term baby steps?
I did. Yeah.
Baby step. I like that one. Small changes accumulate over time. The stuff that we can stick with has far greater impact than any like one thing we only do temporarily.
And let's end it on that. I think
All
that's the
right.
most important part.
Nice.
Yep. Yep. Thank you so much.
You're very much welcome. Thank you.